There's a process here.
New Zealand National.
49 votes in favour.
New Zealand Labour.
34 votes opposed.
Green Party of Aotearoa New Zealand.
15 votes opposed.
ACT New Zealand.
11 votes in favour.
New Zealand First.
8 votes in favour.
Te Pāti Maori.
E ono ngā pōti if
6 votes opposed.
No, don't.
What you just listened to is a clip from the New Zealand Parliament where the Maori Party performed a haka in protest of the far-right coalition attempting to introduce legislation that would take away their rights that have been given to them in agreement with the British government originally in response to the oppression faced by the Maori people during the colonization of New Zealand by the English Empire. I've listened to that audio multiple times a day, every single day since it's happened, because it is just so powerful and has just filled me with so much hope. And it's so incredibly rare to see something and hear something like that actually come out of a parliament anywhere. Like at this point, listeners will know, like, we're beyond fed up and not putting our hopes on, you know, the parliamentary process to bring in anything. But this is like everything that I wish that we saw more often, you know, not standing for injustice and a movement that is actually tied to a larger movement of people in the streets, not just left to those of us on the streets to do things, but actually, you know, in conjunction with people who are elected to parliament. And it's just such an incredibly powerful moment. And we're going to talk about that, unpack it a little bit, and as well as a few other topics today here on Rabble Rants.
Watching that, I often sometimes worry that, is it just like performative though? And it's not. In some cases, you know, I was thinking, what would I do if the NDP did something similar? And I think if I saw the NDP do something like that right now, I would just say it's very just performative. It had no real point. You know, it wouldn't really accomplish anything. But then when you see the reaction and like hear what just the impact it was on you as an individual, you can only imagine what that impact was then on a bunch of Indigenous movements that are essentially fighting back against the same stuff. What I found interesting, too, is we're always trying to draw parallels to the Canadian situation as well. And surely folks can understand this. I mean, not just comparing it to the NDP, but in terms of Indigenous resistance and the treatment of Indigenous people and how it's enshrined in paperwork. I don't know if folks remember. I'm not old enough to remember, because this will make me sound really old, but I mean, Trudeau's pappy, one that likes to be revered as one of Canada's greatest prime ministers, he attempted to do this very thing with the white paper and Indigenous status, Indian status. He wanted to essentially remove the Indian Act from having any influence on Canadian policy. It's this kind of basic understanding of what equality is, and a lot of people fall for it. And that's the rhetoric the far-right party is using in New Zealand to push this kind of legislation where everyone should be on the same footing, right? Isn't that equality? We don't want to label you as Indigenous. You are New Zealanders. And in the same breath, it would be, we wanted to remove the Indian Act the Liberals did, because it would put everybody on equal footing. But what it does is like completely erase the realities of the conditions on which the Indian Act were signed and the current status of Indigenous peoples. Because like Canada, in New Zealand, Indigenous people make up disproportionate amounts of poverty, incarceration. They are still a marginalized people. And what they wanted to do, the Nationalist Party and the Act, was to simply pretend that that was not true, but under the guise that they were doing something good, that they were. And so, any resistance to this is Indigenous people don't want equality. They want superiority, completely twisting the situation. But we see that here, right, in the racist colonial settler response to Indigenous resistance, and over 1492 Land Back Lane, for example, and the land owed in Caledonia, where we have just simply gone against treaties without ripping up the paperwork, and any attempt to thwart that and resist that is criminalized. Or the Speaker of the House in New Zealand said it was very disrespectful what they were doing, and I would argue that bill is far more disrespectful than anything ever said by the Maori MPs there.
Yeah, I think they showed it the exact right amount of respect, if you ask me. The way that they timed this, right? Like, this wasn't at the beginning of the process, right? Like, they made their arguments, spoke about how ridiculous it was, mobilized thousands of people in the streets who were marching across the country in protest of this, right? They had a mass movement going. And it was only at the end of the voting process when they were asked to submit, their party's vote. And they also tried to, by the way, because the parties were voting by block, they tried to make it so that the individual MPs of the various parties could vote as individuals, as opposed to just by party lines, because there is right now this coalition in New Zealand that is being propped up by far right parties, such as the one that introduced this bill, and that party, well, the center right party, who has the majority of the seats, said that they would support this bill in its first reading, essentially, as part of their agreement to form government, right? While many of them would actually be opposed to it, and it is expected that this bill will not succeed. For those of you who are not familiar with the Haka, it is a traditional ceremonial dance that has a variety of uses. Many people believe it is essentially a wartime intimidation dance. That is not accurate to what the Haka is. It is used in celebration, to honor people, to voice opposition. It's made popular by the New Zealand All Black rugby team, right? That probably why people have that wartime intimidation connotations with it. And in this instance, it was definitely in protest of this bill, and it was led by the youngest MP, who is part of the Te Pāti Maori Party, and at 22 years old, MP Hana Rauhiti Maipi Clark, and all of her party joined in, and they went right into the face of oh my god, I need to name this guy. Who's the fucking shitface libertarian? David Seymour, who is the leader of the ACT New Zealand Party, which is a libertarian party. He's the one who's championing this bill, and joined in, of course, by many of the members of the gallery in just a wonderful display, really. This, for me, it brings up so many emotions about watching so many times where people have been protesting in galleries across different legislative bodies, whether it's city councils, whether it's in provincial parliament, whether it's in federal parliament, and you see these MPs or city councillors or whoever it is who say that they stand with you, and they sit there in silence. Meanwhile, here we have the Maori Party leading this chant with the people of the gallery, shutting this shit down and showing the exact response that it deserves. For me, it is everything that we wish we saw more often.
more often, and especially during a goddamn genocide.
Yes.
I cannot believe that only one elected representative that I know of has been removed from these official processes in protest of the Israeli genocide on Gaza. You know, I'm talking about Sarah Jama, obviously. Not only was she removed from the House, her party kicked her out, and she's censored for wearing the keffiyeh, and nobody could even show up the next day in a fucking keffiyeh. They couldn't even do that. They've done nothing. They've had real fiery statements and petitions and whatnot, but they haven't even sat up and stood up for the people that are taking the risks. So we started off this conversation by saying, like, normally it's the gallery that makes the noise, right? It's the people, the base, that ends up taking all the risks, that are on the front lines, so to speak, even though we've elected people to fight on our behalf, to go into these places of power and be our voices. They are doing nothing inside those houses to disrupt what's happening. Like nothing. No sit-ins. No, I'm not fucking leaving till this happens. And fuck the consequences. Sorry, I got really riled up listening to you talk about what, like, this is what we should have sometimes. And if there was ever a time, honestly, we should be so, and we're getting the opposite. Right? We're getting emphasis on decorum and respectability process. Even at the beginning, you know, they attempted to put in more words before the vote. You know, the speaker, if that's what they called them over in New Zealand, was trying to get through the process, and he's yelling, no, we have a process. There's a process. We're going to go to the vote now. And so they're like, fuck your process.
His face.
Here's my vote. This is what my vote sounds like. And it has nothing to, you can't write this into your transcript. You don't even know what to do with this. They had to shut down the House and put it into, you know, recess or whatever they call it. They just had no response, and it made them look like fools, and even calling it disrespectful made them sound like racist bigots. And so, like, that's necessary sometimes to unveil the buffoonery that is the legislature. And if you know you're like some fourth place party and you've got nothing to lose in this moment, then why wouldn't you risk it all? And these people aren't even risking it all if you talk about it. I mean, the worst that happens to you when you disrupt these is you're censored, and it has no weight. I'd also like a shout out. I don't have their name for the notes, but this comes only weeks after an Australian MP, she was just censored the other day for this, screaming at King Charles, this is not your land. You are not my king. And again, being, you know, kind of shunned by the typical ruling class, but warmly embraced by everybody who was thinking the same thing. And I can't relate to people who go into these spaces or have huge platforms and aren't doing everything possible. And geez, the way Canada responds to, you know, Indigenous defiance. It's the same people over here going, oh, wow, wasn't that neat? Watch them do that. I mean, not you, but a lot of other people probably thought that moment was pretty powerful, yet wouldn't respond the same way to, you know, land defenders here in Canada.
Yeah, and for anyone who hasn't seen this, by the way, please, like, we're an audio podcast. We don't have video. Please go actually watch, because you saw, like, the passion and the power on their faces, their expressions during this shows you like how important this was. There's a reason that it's going viral in the way it does, because so many of us can relate. I mean, like, the story of New Zealand and its Indigenous people is the same story in Australia, it's the same story in Canada, it's the same story in the United States, and it is definitely the same story right now in what's happening in Palestine.
It's the last step in, like, assimilation or genocide, right? You either are erased or you must then completely embrace the new nation, right? You must become Australian, a New Zealander, a Canadian, or else we will starve you. We will push you to the brink. And yeah, Canada has the same pattern. I mean, doing it by paper is just making it official. Is like, now it's no longer part of your country's history, which is, you know, very Orwellian to try to look back at those relationships like that. But I forgot to mention when we were talking about, like, the differences and the fact that, you know, we don't have politicians kind of really taking stands on many things. I mean, I mentioned the genocide, but the treatment of Indigenous land defenders by the RCMP has garnered no reaction either. Or, Indigenous rights is just like a side note to most of our politicians, because we generally still don't cede power to Indigenous peoples. Indigenous MPs and MPPs and MLAs are few and far between. And folks that resist systems openly are even fewer. In the example of Nova Scotia's having an election right now, I think those folks vote on November 26th. And they had Eastern Passage candidate there, Tammy Jakeman, removed as a candidate for standing up for Palestine. I mean, the social media, the quotes that they have on her are so tame. I mean, they are so incredibly tame. There was nothing anti-Semitic about them. I'll link the article. But as usual, CIJA came after them and the NDP just crumbled. They turned their back on her, removed her as a candidate. She'll run as an independent, which is the only way in Canada that you can actually run and be in government and say what you need to say. Clearly, partisan politics are just a death trap for activists and free thinkers. So, honestly, if Tammy's listening, I'm glad that you're free from the confines of the NDP for the moment. And, they just don't deserve people like that, honestly. But if anybody's looking for them still to champion through this, the way you look to Kamala, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen.
No. And like, this really shows you, like, the contrast couldn't be any clearer, right? Like, you see the elder MPs who are part of the Maori party, and their reaction to this moment was a reaction of pride, right? They were so proud of this young MP, and they could see that, the future generations are continuing their battle. Right. And since this has happened, because obviously there's been all kinds of outroar in media, and it's gotten international attention, they have had her back every step of the way. They have been there to defend her. This is not they're not leaving her out to dry. Right.
No. And they're joined by thousands of people in the street. Incredible
Contrast to what happens when you stand up for something in the NDP or in any party, really. So until the day that we see that kind of response, please do not forget who the NDP are. Do not forget what our parliamentary system is like, because we cannot put our hopes there. They do not have our backs. They're not here. They already, all the lines have been crossed, and they have not stood up. So don't expect that they'll stand up when things get worse. Like, they should have stood up a hell of a long time ago.
I have a story. Story time. Ontario. Doug Ford comes in. He's going to undo every possible positive labor reform that Kathleen Wynne and the Liberals put in their dying days. Of course, they probably knew what was going to happen, but this was legislation. I mean, increases to the minimum wage. There was so much to be lost. Shift workers were going to get some. It was incredible. People had fought decades for what was in that bill. And with one foul swoop, Doug Ford was going to take it all away. And so the gallery was packed with people to support the NDPs, at least allegedly, in their fight against this legislation, I guess. Andrea Horwath didn't even show up for the vote. I don't know where she was, but we had packed the gallery, organized. I mean, not just a bunch of rabble rousers, the Workers' Action Center, QP, everybody was there. It was packed. We were all hauled away by security, and no one was arrested, but they just, I think a couple of them applauded our efforts, and that was that. But the leader of the party at the time didn't even show up and had really nothing to say about the fight that had got to that point, or the people who were putting it up in the gallery. It was so demonstrative of exactly what you're talking about that I had to interrupt you and tell it.
No, that's exactly it, right?
It's not just hypothetical. This is actually what happens when, that's their idea of solidarity, a little quiet fist pump when nobody's looking. whenever it's safe to do so. We've got a lot to unpack for this Rabble Rant. Didn't really have a smooth transition into this one, except just more shitty politicians. Let's talk about the 13, now 15 Ontario, what we call big city mayors. They actually even have a caucus, the Ontario Big City Mayors Caucus. It sounds really fun. I mean, I can only imagine how they talk about themselves in that circle, but either way. 15 of those assholes signed a letter, like at the full invitation of the premier, like on the day before. Ford gets up there and he tells them, write me a letter. You want me to do this? You want me to use the notwithstanding clause to go against a charter ruling so that city mayors can make it easier to clear encampments, as though they don't already clear encampments. We'll get into that. But so they put this letter together without even consulting the councillors. So it makes it seem as though it's representing 15 big cities. I mean, it was 12. Then Cam Guthrie, the piece of shit mayor in Guelph, who just spends all his time on Twitter demonizing unhoused people and drugs, it became 13, and now it's 15. I'm not sure the two additional ones I'm here to name and shame, but you folks can find the letter. And they addressed it to the premier, and they don't just ask for him to use the notwithstanding clause, which we need to talk about. Because that's like a whole episode, but we're going to unpack it a little bit here on what our charter means when premiers keep using the notwithstanding clause. But that was all in the letter. Like, the disdain they have for homeless people was so evident in that letter, because it includes calls for, easier ways to incarcerate people for trespassing multiple times at the same location. In other words, in the same park near the available services where they're used to being in their community. If they do it more than once, cops can take them to jail. They also ask for the premier to expand the mandatory drug treatment systems, where they're, and this is all part of the premier's plan. These folks have obviously talked in back rooms together to draft this letter, because it's exactly what the premier has already proposed, which the BC NDP is already doing, which is increasing the ability for police to put people who they deem to be addicted to drugs or having mental health issues and incarcerate them, to hold them, to detain them, and to force them into treatment. So this letter is just like full of goodies like this, and they're trying to build a consensus around this. I want to note, though, the folks, Diana Chan McNally, she tweeted just today that there's a coalition that has formed against this of, I'm sure this is an increasing number, but 41 councillors from these cities have signed a letter saying, you did not ask us about this. We do not agree with this. This does not represent us. So on top of that caucus I talked about, the big city mayors, I mean, this is just 15 out of the 29 that sit there. The caucus actually did not want to do this. So it's kind of like a rogue group from within the big city mayors that are building a relationship with the premier and the Conservative Party and ballooning these conservative points into the public to see how they react. It's actually really awful that more and more mayors are signing on to this, considering the backlash that went out. That means that at some point there's a few mayors out there that saw this, refused to sign on to it at the beginning, and then saw the public's reaction and actually then signed on to it. Or maybe more deals are being made with the premier's office. We're not sure. But they're asking them to do anything possible, anything, not even legally. I mean, I should have explained, the reason they have to use the notwithstanding clause, or will likely have to use it, is because we talked about this and people weren't sure of its impact back then. But obviously the powers that be took that ruling in Waterloo very seriously, that it wouldn't just apply to Waterloo when the judge ruled that it was against the charter rights to clear encampments when you don't have the shelter space for those people. You are directly contributing to them being homeless, and denying their right for housing. So the ruling was that they declare these bylaws inoperative insofar that they only apply to, homeless people, which you can enact legislation that specifically targets a demographic. And that doing this on city property when you know you don't have accessible shelter beds is, to go against everything you think the charter stands for. So, I mean, even when you have these victories like this, you see the powers that be willing to do whatever's within their power to undermine them. That's a little bit disheartening.
Yeah. And it's not like, the city has been without enough. I mean, when we talk about shelter space, we have a lot of conversations that are going to be coming up about the shelter system operates as a form of carceral system, right? About how it is not actually an answer about how unhoused people are not safe there. And just recently, the city of Toronto has been pretty busy still clearing its encampments. The clearing of Allen Gardens, which we haven't really had a chance to discuss in depth on this show, was particularly disturbing, given that, for a long time, the city made it seem almost as if the Allen Garden encampment was protected, like it was untouchable, like they wouldn't be clearing the Allen Gardens encampment that has been there for so long. I mean, this is nothing less than just targeting the most vulnerable people. And especially with the state that Canada is in right now, there are much bigger issues that they're not focusing on, but they're doing this because it is a popular public image for them amongst their base, right? It is, there is no actual reasoning or logic behind any of it.
But you say their base, and I know folks might be relieved that Olivia Chow and Andrea Horvath didn't sign the letter, but you've just demonstrated that even the progressive mayors, they're not even appealing to their base with this. Whose base that they're appealing to, or, that was always their prerogative. I'm not sure, but no, Toronto didn't sign it. But they don't give a shit. You want to know why? Because they use places like the Delta Hotel as proof that they have shelter for people, and they don't. Right? Every time they clear an encampment, it's like they pretend it wasn't coercive. We have so many episodes where we've interviewed folks on what those encampment clearances look like. And, the press release is always the same. We found them housing. We spoke, we worked with the community, and we found them housing. And in reality, it's, the carceral shelter system that they're now hauling them out of one by one. So, we can really demonize the 15 mayors here, but I'm not sure that there's really a municipality out there to look up to at the moment.
No.
Because Hamilton is also clearing out encampments and acting as though there was no ruling.
And the timing of it also is particularly nefarious, right? We all feel the temperature dropping. Winter is coming. Winter is almost here, right? Winter, when you're unhoused, is just that much more brutal and challenging to survive. Every day, survival is that much more difficult versus in the summer when you can live outside to a certain extent, right? And their timing feels like it adds to that coercive nature, right? Where you're like, well, we just took away what you have. What are you going to do? You have no choice but to accept these shelter spaces.
Or death.
Or death. There's no other possible interpretation of their intentions other than malice and complete disregard for the lives of unhoused people. I would call it social murder, but I feel like that would be generous. I think this goes far beyond even social murder. It is that malicious.
And they don't see it as such because they don't value their lives. There's no way you can convince me that they do. When you even have Olivia Chow clearing unhoused folks out for Taylor Swift, you are just seeing people as some infrastructure blockage, some sort of barrier to development or optics, an optics problem. They're not people. They aren't community members for sure, because no one gives a shit where they move people. Like the Delta's out in Scarborough. I grew up in Scarborough. This isn't to slam Scarborough, but where the hotel is nowhere near anything else, really. It's not within a community. And folks that are living there didn't start off in Scarborough. Some might have, but the core is where most of the services are, and that's where they were moved to. And it's just they're not people to them. There's no way somebody is sitting there making these decisions and going, well, how is that going to impact these individuals? And if they do, surely the conclusion is coming to, well, they're probably going to die. Because even as you say that we're going into winter, then I am triggered to remember that this is exactly what we were saying last October. We were like, how can they be upping the encampment clearings at a time like this?
The deja vu is not lost. It's clear that this has been an ongoing strategy for years now, right? The fact that also you mentioned like the Taylor Swift thing, I'm not going to go too far into it, but like the fact that we're clearing people for a fucking concert is in particular bad taste, and it's not a uniquely Toronto thing either. Everywhere that Taylor Swift has gone on this tour, municipalities have been in preparation clearing unhoused people, evicting unhoused people. Same thing that we saw for the Olympics, right, in France. It's this it continues this trend of just wanting to hide away any of the problems as opposed to doing anything to actually help people. It's all about presenting the image of a functioning city as opposed to actually creating a functioning, livable city for everyone.
They shut down the gardener and gave her a police escort. I mean, I would rather police be doing this than all the other things those pigs are doing. But the gardener, it was like at fucking rush hour. The gardener, for those who don't live in Toronto, it's like the only way you can go east to west in the city without streetcars and stoplights. Or at least in the core.
They closed down streets days before the concert for merch sales.
No, they didn't.
They did. I mean, like I'm on the West End, like I'm pretty close by. When I heard I couldn't, but for merch sales. I mean, this.
Did you get some?
As far as I know, it's only available for those who are attending the concert. You have to show that you have tickets.
Well, that's not elitist or anything. I'm so glad everyone's looking up to this person.
No. Well, that's the whole thing is this whole frenzy around this tour, this concert has all been elitist. It's all like this big status symbol of I managed to get tickets to this thing, and it is exclusive and special, and people are paying thousands of dollars for this. And meanwhile, Taylor Swift, who is a billionaire and this tour has made billions, who commands the ability to actually, with that cult following, like Taylor Swift could actually bring about good change in the world with words, with like few sentences. I mean, the amount of power, and not a fucking word, not a fucking effort. It is, to me, just so absolutely dystopian and disgusting and despicable. And like having just watched Toronto over these past few days, and it's not over yet, but I just it's hard to like it's just so it's hard to watch.
She kind of embodies, or as I hear you speak, I don't think a lot about Taylor Swift, but as I hear you talking, it's like embodying peak white liberal feminism. Because what I do know of Taylor Swift is friendship bracelets. I saw really big ones in the city, and I just, I'm not completely void of pop culture references now that I'm older. So I know friendship bracelets are a thing. And I also see some female Democrats wearing blue friendship bracelets so that everyone knows, don't worry, I voted for the right person. And all of that just seems very related to the idea of keeping us like just really distracted with superficial shit, but under this guise that it actually is very political, that she is like empowering women. She endorsed Kamala and is anti-Trump, and so like we should, Swifties probably come after you too, because I imagine she donates money where she goes too to kind of smooth over the image and whatnot. But it's kind of like exactly what's wrong with the political leftish, like this is all we're willing to do is have like little kind of kumbaya moments with friendship bracelets and our vote. And somehow we feel like we could like wear this blue bracelet to be like, we're better. We're better than the red bracelets. You know, don't you worry. I stood up for you. You know, to all the marginalized people that are going to go down under Trump. Don't worry. I stood up for you. I voted for Kamala. Not you, Palestinians. Not you, but everyone else.
I mean, for fuck's sakes, like, it's just that is exactly what it is. I mean, the word that just comes to mind is it's all incredibly Gramscian, which, not to get too highbrow.
This isn't a theory podcast.
Yeah, but like it's giving Gramsci is what it is, and that's all I'll say about that. But like, I mean, for fuck's sake, the fact that they're even temporarily renaming streets after her in Toronto. Meanwhile, like the frenzy, like in response to the idea of renaming Dundas Street, that has been met on the right, like, no, but Taylor Swift, she can change the infrastructure in the city.
Can we dedicate a bike lane to Taylor instead? No one would tear it down then, right? You just couldn't. They would be out in masses with their friendship bracelets.
Right?
They would form one giant friendship bracelet around the last bike lane in Toronto before Premier Ford could erase them all. What is with my mom asked me, she's like, what is with this whole bike lane? Like, she can't even understand. My mom does not ride a bike. She's all for the war on the bike, right? Like, she is pro car, but she's like, what? And I'm just like, I don't know. I think it's like this vendetta from his brother. His brother hated bike lanes. I don't actually understand. I guess it's like appealing to the person stuck in traffic, you know?
It's very popular right now. It's popular with his suburban base who doesn't live in Toronto, right?
No, I promise. We don't care about bike lanes. We don't give a shit. We don't even see them.
I'm talking about the ones that like commute into the city.
They don't even know what they are. They're just driving them. That's not true. I have a bike lane in my town.
There's this because there's the idea that it doesn't matter how many studies there's been that have proved otherwise. There's the idea about bike lanes and traffic, right? And people are just like, it's turned into a culture war, which is insane to me that we could have a culture war about bike lanes.
We can have it about anything. Clearly.
Yeah. I mean, this idea that the provincial government can just decide on whether or not a city is allowed to have bike lanes and can remove existing bike lanes. Okay, like if people actually wanted to get mad about, because a lot of our streets in Toronto, I get it, they're tight, narrow streets, you know, we're talking King Street, Queen Street.
Okay, if you've been to Europe, people are going, no, they're not. No, they're not. These are wide fucking streets.
Like essentially, streets like King Street, Queen Street, Dundas, College, these streets operate almost as single lane in each direction because this other lane is mostly occupied by cars being parked there. And so instead of getting mad at the fact that we have entire lanes of traffic on our busiest streets dedicated to cars being able to park there, we're getting angry at a narrow strip of bike lane, most of it which isn't even protected across the city, right? Meanwhile, like, as if like drivers showed the least bit of respect for the Bloor Street bike lane, where the amount of people I know who have been doored on the Bloor Street bike lane, right? Like, it's already not safe enough. It's already not good enough. You're not going to be able to put in a whole lane of traffic just by getting rid of it. It does very little. All it really does is appease the fucking base that has this anti-bike lane frenzy, right? Like, it is completely devoid of any logic. Like, the city of Toronto, like, most of our bike lanes are painted suggestions in the middle of the road that tell you that you can share this lane with a car. And you just hope that the car doesn't run you over. Meanwhile, like, I mean, I'm not even kidding. Yesterday, I took an Uber to work because I was tired and it was my day 6 and I wasn't supposed to be working. And my Uber driver flipped off a cyclist and was yelling out the window at a cyclist while I'm through. Like, the amount of aggression that you see in the city. There's all kinds of studies about how when you wear a helmet as a cyclist, that drivers are less likely to see you as a human being. It is not. I love biking. I do not bike as much as I would like to in this city because I do not feel safe. I have seen it too many times. I've seen a cyclist killed in front of me on Dundas Street, near Dundas and Bathurst in this city. I've seen my friend injured multiple times. I have heard too many stories. It is not safe to be a cyclist in this city. Yet they want to take the few things that actually can protect cyclists. There's no other way to put it. It is putting lives in danger. It is. It is ridiculous.
I just want to hit on one point before we sign off on this rant. It's beyond ridiculous. But a lot of folks are asking that question, though. Like, how can the province make a decision like that? And I think I just want to remind everyone, because it's kind of unbelievable, but a lot of people don't know this. Municipalities are completely creatures of the province, meaning they all simply exist because of a piece of legislation, like the City of Toronto's Act or the Ontario Municipalities Act. I mean, it's been a while since I took municipal politics in university, but basically that's how it works. So like the school boards, should they become any kind of obstacle, the province has complete jurisdiction over cities and how they run. I mean, if you all remember, one of the first things Ford did was cut the Toronto City Councillors in half, despite all of the resistance to that, gerrymandered the council pretty much, and there was nothing they can do about it. And especially when you're operating with a mayor that has 3 times used the notwithstanding clause, twice successfully, it doesn't even really matter if he has the right or not. So it's not just to be like, oh, here's this helpful little bit of political knowledge. It's just another piece of proof to you that the systems in which we have to operate under are completely stacked against us. And even the mechanisms within them to give us autonomy, like municipalities and charter rights, they are all completely erasable. They are not written in stone like you believe the 10 Commandments may be. It's just really just pieces of paper. I mean, the Health Canada Act, your public health care is just a piece of legislation. It's not written into anything that can't be undone. Absolutely not. Thanks for letting us rant. If you liked it, share it. If you want to know more, check out the show notes. Whatever you do, keep on disrupting.